Alright, we're going to solve another quadratic equation, and this one's a little bit different than the last several were because there's no x term. Take a look, we've got an x squared term and we have a plain number but no x term. When this happens, there's really an easy way to solve them. You don't need to use the quadratic formula. Now you could use the quadratic formula because you could rewrite this as 3x squared plus 0x minus 21 equals 0. So you see what I did? There's no x term, but if I put in 0x, it's the reason it went away, because the coefficient is 0. So I can put that back in like that. Then I could make my list. A equals 3, B equals 0, and C equals negative 21. And then I could fill all the values into my quadratic formula like we've done on the last several problems. But you know what? There's an easier way to solve this one. So I'm going to cover this up and show you the easier way rather than the quadratic formula. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to get the plain number on one side of the equation, and the x squared term is going to stay on this side. So I'm going to move minus 21 over to the other side, and this will become 21 equals 3x squared. Alright? So my goal here is to get x alone, to find out what values work for x. So first thing I'm going to do to get x alone is divide both sides by 3. I want to get that 3 off of there and it's being multiplied. So I undo by dividing. So I get 7 equals x squared. Now this says it says what number times itself equals 7. Well, again, we want to get x alone, so I want to undo the squaring. And if you remember what I talked about earlier, that on your calculator, your square root key shares the keypad with the squaring key. Squaring and square rooting undo each other. They are inverse operations. So if I want to get x alone, I'm going to take the square root of this side. And whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other. Now, there's one additional step to this. When you take the square root of the number on this side, we need to add a plus and minus. Remember how in our quadratic formula we have the plus and minus here, because there are almost always two answers to a quadratic equation when you're solving it for 0? Well, there are going to be two numbers that times themselves make 7, a positive one and a negative one. So we put this plus and minus sign out front. Now, on the right side here, squaring undoes square rooting, or vice versa, and out falls the x. The square root sign eats the 2, and out falls the x. On this side, we take our calculator, and we calculate the square root of 7, since it's not going to be a nice perfect square number. And I get about 2.646, if I round carefully, 2.646. So plus and minus 2.646 is equal to x. So I have two answers. Let's write them out. X will either be 2.646 or x will be negative 2.646. So again, if you have a quadratic equation with no x term, follow these steps. Put the plain number on one side of the equation, the x term on the other side, the x squared term. Get the x alone through a series of undoing steps, and don't forget your plus and minus sign when you get down to the square root of some number so that you get two answers.